Parents refused to let me move in with them with my newborn after being divorced and abandoned by my husband because they don't want my mistakes to hurt their darling daughter's peace. They're now inviting me for years later because sister just abandoned them for her career and they're old, lonely and miserable. So here's what I did. 5 years ago, my world completely fell apart. My ex-husband walked out on me when I was 8 months pregnant. We'd been married for 3 years and I thought our life was perfect. He'd always been sweet and attentive. The kind of guy who brought me flowers just because or stayed up late binge-watching bad reality TV with me, even though he hated it. But everything changed about 6 months into my pregnancy. He became distant, started working late and was glued to his phone. At first, I thought it was just nerves about becoming a dad. You know, guys freak out sometimes, but I couldn't have been more wrong. One day, I came home from a routine prenatal appointment, feeling all excited to show him the ultrasound picture. But when I opened the door, the apartment was almost empty. Half of our stuff was gone, and there was just this note on the kitchen counter. It said he wasn't ready for this life, and that he'd move in with his girlfriend of 6 months. 6 months. That means while I was pregnant he'd been seeing someone else practically the whole time. I couldn't even process what was happening. I was devastated, and devastated doesn't even come close to describing it. It felt like someone had literally ripped my heart out and stomped on it. To make matters worse, I was unemployed. I quit my teaching job a few months earlier because my pregnancy complications were so bad. I was constantly sick, nauseous, dizzy and just not able to function. Working was out of the question, so there I was. No job, no partner and a baby on the way. We were renting our place and there was no way in hell I could afford it on my own. I had some savings, but honestly, it wasn't going to last long. The thought of having to figure this all out alone was terrifying. I spent the next few days in a fog, just trying to wrap my head around what had happened. The anger came later, but for the first few days I couldn't even focus enough to be mad. All I could think about was how the hell I was going to make it through the next few months. I hadn't been prepared for any of this. I didn't even know where to begin. What was I supposed to do now? I remember just sitting on the living room floor looking around at the emptiness and crying. Not a quiet, calm cry either. It was the kind of cry where you're gasping for air between sobs, like your body can't even keep up with how much hurt you're feeling. I cried until I was completely drained and then I did the one thing I'd been avoiding. I called my parents. Now here's a bit about my family. My parents are well off. My dad's a dentist, my mom's a real estate agent and they've always lived comfortably. Their house in suburban Massachusetts is huge. 4 bedrooms. Plenty of space. Growing up they weren't the hug-it-out type, more like the tough love kind. But in my mind, I thought, this is it. I'm in a crisis. I need help. They'll come through, right? So I explained everything. How my husband left, how I was pregnant and how I didn't know where to go or what to do next. I asked if I could move back in with them just until I got back on my feet. I figured they'd at least offer me a little compassion, but instead I got a hard no. And here's the kicker. It wasn't because they couldn't make room for me. They had more than enough space. It wasn't because they were struggling financially. Far from it. They said no because they didn't want my mistakes to affect my younger sister, Claire. Claire was 24 at the time, finishing her last year of medical school, and apparently having a crying baby around might ruin her concentration and jeopardize her future. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't just a no. It was a heartless no with no empathy or understanding of what I was going through. They didn't want to disrupt Claire's perfect little life. Meanwhile, I was trying to pick up the pieces of mine. That moment when I realized they weren't going to help me, it hit harder than anything else. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the total lack of support when I needed it most. And it was a reminder that my family's idea of help was more about their comfort than mine. I'd always known they had this tough love mentality, but I didn't think it would extend to a situation like this when I was literally struggling to survive. I begged. I told them I'd stay in the basement. I promised I'd be quiet and do my best not to be a burden. I even said I'd contribute financially once I got back to work, but they wouldn't budge. My mom actually suggested I consider putting the baby up for adoption because I clearly wasn't in a position to raise a child. That's when I knew I was done. I hung up and haven't called them since. What followed was hands down the hardest year of my life. I found a tiny run-down studio apartment in a sketchy part of town and moved in. I applied for every government assistance program I could qualify for, food stamps, Medicaid, you name it. I gave birth to my beautiful daughter, Rainey, all by myself. My ex didn't even show up, which wasn't surprising since he'd already signed away his parental rights in exchange for never having to pay child support. Desperate times, desperate decisions, right? Those first few months with Rainey were brutal. I was up all night with her. Then working online tutoring gigs whenever she napped. Eventually, I started picking up substitute teaching jobs when I could afford a babysitter. It was a juggling act, and I was constantly on the verge of burnout, but somehow we made it through. Fast forward to now and things are so much better. Rainey's about to start kindergarten and she's the most amazing little girl. She's curious, kind, and has this big infectious laugh that lights up a room. I've managed to rebuild my teaching career too. After everything, I somehow made it back to work and I'm even tenured now at a really great school. It wasn't easy, but I've been grinding and now it feels like all the hard work is paying off. We live in this cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood and it feels like home. I've even got a little savings tucked away for a rainy day. Life isn't perfect but it's stable and the best part is it's ours. I've built this life for Rainy and me and it feels good. But last week, out of the blue, I got an email from my parents. I almost didn't recognize the name in my inbox and I was seriously shocked. I mean, I can count on one hand how many times they've contacted me in the last decade. Anyway, the email starts with a life update. Apparently, my perfect sister, their pride and joy, just finished her residency and landed some high-profile job at a fancy hospital in California. Oh, and she's apparently too busy to visit more than once a year, doesn't call much, and is living her best life in San Francisco. Meanwhile, my parents, now in their mid-60s, are feeling lonely and forgotten. The email goes on about how they've been doing a lot of reflecting on their past mistakes. I guess it's nice that they're acknowledging it and how much they miss me and Rainy. And for context, Rainy is 7 now and they've never even met her. They basically begged us to spend Christmas with them and then here's the kicker. They offered to set up a college fund for Rainy. On paper, that might sound nice, right? But how do I just forget everything they put me through? Did they think an email and a college fund can erase years of pain? When I got pregnant, they couldn't have cut me off faster. They didn't want to disrupt my sister's future or interfere with her studies. They left me to figure everything out on my own. No help, no support, nothing. There were nights I cried myself to sleep because I didn't know how I was going to make it. I had to choose between buying diapers or food for myself. Rainy and I spent so many birthdays and holidays alone and now they suddenly want to play the doting grandparents? I can't just act like nothing happened. Part of me wants to write them back and lay it all out. I want them to understand how badly they hurt me. I want them to know that Rainy doesn't even know what she's missing because she's been surrounded by my incredible friends. People who've become her honorary aunts and uncles. They've given her the love and support I never got from my own parents. But then there's this other part of me that wonders if I'm being too harsh. They're getting older now. Rainy does deserve to know her grandparents, doesn't she? But then again, does she really? Do I want to let people who are willing to let us both go into foster care back into our lives just because they're feeling lonely now? I haven't replied yet. I'm stuck. Honestly, a big part of me just wants to ignore the email entirely and let it sit there without a response. But then another part of me wants to write back with all the bitterness I've been carrying around for years and tell them exactly where they can shove their college fund. So I guess that's where I'm at right now. AITA? For just ignoring them? Or am I being too stubborn and not giving them another chance? I really don't know what to do. It's been driving me crazy trying to figure it out. Update 1. First off, I just want to thank everyone who commented and sent me messages after I shared my story. I honestly didn't expect so many people to connect with what I've been through. Your responses were this mix of comforting, validating, and honestly kind of eye-opening. I've read every single comment, some more than once, and I can't tell you how much your advice has helped me sort through this mess. Anyway, here's what's happened since then. After days of overthinking and reliving all the crap from 5 years ago, I finally decided to reply to my parents' email. It wasn't easy. I typed something, delete it, rewrite it, and still feel like it wasn't right. I wanted to be honest without coming off too harsh, but I also didn't want to sugarcoat anything. In the end, I kept it short and to the point. I told them I needed time to process their message and wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive or even trust them yet. I also made it super clear that Rainy was my top priority and I wouldn't let her be part of any drama or half-hearted efforts. Their response? Oh, boy. It was a 5-paragraph guilt trip wrapped in a thin layer of apology. They started off by saying sorry again. I guess points for consistency. But then it quickly turned into this long justification session. My dad wrote about how their hands were tied back then because Claire's future was at stake and they had to make a hard choice. He even said they thought I was strong enough to figure things out on my own and didn't realize how much it had hurt me. And then my mom chimed in and she mentioned how they'd been praying for me and Rainy every single day and hoped I'd understand their side now that I'm a parent myself. Like what? I sat there reading it just getting angrier by the second. They thought I was strong enough? That's like tossing someone into the deep end of a pool and saying, "Oh, you'll be fine. You're a good swimmer," while they're literally drowning. And the whole praying for us thing, that's nice, but maybe try doing something actionable instead of crossing your fingers and hoping God fixes what you broke. And let's talk about their so-called hard choice. They didn't just make a hard choice, they made the easiest choice for themselves. They picked the path of least resistance, supporting Claire and completely cutting me off because it was more convenient for them. They didn't just abandon me, they abandoned Rainy too. And now, after all this time, I'm supposed to feel bad for them because they're lonely. I haven't replied yet, honestly. I don't even know if I will. Part of me feels like I should just write back and tell them how ridiculous their excuses sound. But another part of me wonders if it's even worth it. What's the point of rehashing all of this if they're just going to keep defending their actions? Here's where things took an unexpected turn. Claire found out about the whole email exchange. She called me 2 days ago absolutely furious. Not at me, but at our parents. Apparently, they told her they'd reached out to me and accused her of abandoning them for her career. Can you believe that? They basically blamed her for why they're feeling so lonely now. Like she's the bad guy for, I don't know, having a life? Claire said she's completely done with their guilt trips and manipulation. And then she said something that really threw me. She feels like they're now trying to use me and Rainey as pawns in their little "we're such good parents" redemption story. Here's the thing about Claire and me. We've never been super close. Growing up, she was the golden child and I was the black sheep, and we were just different. She was the straight A student, the overachiever, the one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was the one who always seemed to disappoint them. So yeah, our relationship has always been kind of distant, but this phone call, it felt different. For the first time, Claire actually acknowledged how much I'd been through. She apologized for not standing up for me back then. She admitted that she'd been so focused on her studies and her own life that she hadn't really noticed how badly our parents were treating me. Hearing her say that and hearing her own up to it, it hit me in a way I didn't expect. I'd been holding on to so much resentment towards her without even fully realizing it. And then she said something that completely floored me. She offered to help set up a college fund for Rainey herself. She said she'd rather do that than let our parents use their money as some kind of leverage to worm their way back into our lives. I didn't even know what to say. I mean, Claire isn't exactly warm and fuzzy, so for her to offer that, it really caught me off guard. That phone call honestly shook me. Didn't magically fix everything between us, but it felt like a small step in the right direction. For the first time in years, I felt like she actually saw me and what I'd been through. I know I'll never forget what our parents did, but there was this weird sense of relief hearing Claire own up to it and acknowledge my pain. I've spent so much time feeling alone in all of this, but talking to her was a reminder that maybe I'm not as alone as I thought. As for my parents, I'm still stuck. Part of me wants to just cut ties completely and move on with my life. They had their chance to be parents and they blew it. I've managed to build a life for Rainey and me, and I don't need them to feel complete or successful. But then there's this other part of me. This little voice that's like, maybe you should at least hear them out in person, not for their sake, but for mine. Maybe it would give me some closure. Maybe it's worth seeing if they've really changed, even though I'm skeptical. The problem is I'm scared that if I give them even an inch, they'll just revert back to their old ways. I don't want to open that door only to get hurt again. At the same time, Rainey deserves to know her grandparents, right? I'm not saying they should be a huge part of her life, but it would be nice for her to have that connection. But I can't shake the feeling that letting them back in now after all these years would feel like I'm accepting their attempts to rewrite history. They're not really asking for forgiveness. They're asking for validation. I keep going back and forth on whether or not it's even worth the emotional energy. And truthfully, it's been exhausting. So I guess I'm still figuring it out. I really appreciate all of you who've been following this whole drama in my life. It means so much to know that people care and understand what I'm going through. I just wish I had a clear answer. But for now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I'll let you know what happens next, but for now it feels like I'm still stuck in this limbo. Update 2. Wow, things have gone off the rails in ways I really didn't see coming. After my last update, I decided to take a step back. I didn't want to make any rash decisions while I was still emotional. So I put my parents' email on the back burner and focused on my daily routine with Rainey. School drop-offs, bedtime stories, grocery runs, just normal life stuff to keep my head clear. But of course life had other plans. Last weekend, completely out of nowhere, my parents showed up at my apartment. No heads up, no text, no call, nothing, just a knock at the door while I was in the middle of making lunch for Rainey. At first, I figured it was a delivery or maybe one of my neighbors, but when I opened the door, there they were. My mom and dad standing there on my front door looking awkward as hell. I froze. My first instinct was to slam the door in their faces, but before I could even react, Rainey came running up behind me. She peeked around my legs, curious about who it was, and they immediately latched onto that. My mom picked her up and started complimenting her and saying stuff like how she looked just like me at that age. It was so uncomfortable. They were acting like proud grandparents, but they've literally never been part of her life. I told Rainey to go back to the kitchen, and thankfully, she listened. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and just stared at them. My dad started talking, saying they were in town for a conference and thought it would be a good chance to see me and Rainey, which, let's be real, was probably a lie. What kind of conference happens on a random weekend? They started in with the apologies again. My dad kept saying how sorry they were and how much they'd missed us. My mom, of course, Started crying. At first I thought maybe she was being genuine, but the more she talked, the more it felt like she was just trying to guilt me into forgiving them on the spot. They asked if we would go out for lunch or coffee to talk properly. I wasn't having it. I told them point blank that showing up unannounced was crossing a major boundary. I also said I wasn't comfortable just sitting down and pretending everything was fine. My dad tried to argue, saying they were just trying to make an effort and that I was being unfair, and my mom chimed in asking me to just give them a chance, but I shut it down. I told them I needed time to think and that I wasn't going to make any decisions right then and there. Before they could say anything else, I turned around, went back inside and locked the door behind me. I just stood there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened, while Rainey kept asking from the kitchen, "Who was it, Mommy?" I honestly feel like they ambushed me in my own home. I get that they're trying to fix things, but showing up like that was just so pushy and invasive. It's like they thought a sudden visit would magically make everything better without any kind of real conversation or effort. And the timing couldn't have been worse. I was finally starting to get some clarity, like maybe I was beginning to figure out what I wanted to do with all this mess, and then they show up out of nowhere. Now I'm just confused and angry all over again. Part of me feels guilty for how I handled it, but then the other part of me is just pissed. How do you go years without even calling and then decide to show up at my door uninvited like you're suddenly going to fix everything? It's like they want to fast forward through all the hard stuff and skip straight to the happy family reunion scene. I'm not ready for that. You can't just ignore someone for years and expect everything to be okay with a couple of hugs and a half-hearted apology. Later that evening, just when I thought I could finally push all of this out of my head for a while, Claire called. Apparently, she'd heard about the surprise visit and was livid. She said that my parents had told her they were planning to fix things with me, and they expected her to help smooth everything over like she's their PR manager or something. Claire didn't hold back. She told them flat out to back off, to stop pressuring me, and to let me deal with things at my own pace on my own terms. Apparently, that didn't go over well at all. The whole conversation turned into this massive argument with my parents accusing Claire of being ungrateful and turning against the family. Classic deflection tactic. They were trying to paint her as the villain for actually standing up for me. After that, Claire was pretty clear with me. She said she's done with their nonsense. She's seriously considering going low contact with them or maybe even cutting ties altogether. She admitted she's so tired of feeling like she has to manage their emotions, their guilt trips, their decisions. It's exhausting. She's also tired of being stuck in the middle, which I totally get. It's like they just keep trying to rope her into their drama and it's wearing her out. Hearing Claire say all of this was honestly a bit of a relief, not in a "I'm glad she's miserable too" way, but in okay, maybe I'm not the only one feeling this way kind of way. For the longest time I felt like I was the only one dealing with their manipulation, their guilt tripping, their constant trying to make me feel like I'm the one in the wrong, but now it's clear they've been doing the same thing to Claire just in their own twisted way. It's not exactly comforting because honestly it sucks that we both had to deal with their crap, but it does make me feel like I'm not crazy for feeling the way I do. I'm not alone in this. I don't know what the next step is yet, but at least now I know Claire's got my back and I've got hers. Maybe that's enough for now. Update 3. So, it's been a few days since the whole surprise visit from my parents, and after a lot of thinking and going back and forth in my head, I finally made a decision. I decided to send them an email. No holding back. I laid everything out for them, told them exactly how the rejection affected me, how hard it's been raising Rainey on my own with no help from them. I made it clear that their sudden interest in us felt less like they truly cared and more like they were just panicking, realizing they were running out of time to fix things before it was too late. I told them that trust doesn't get rebuilt in a day, and showing up unannounced was just a huge violation of the boundaries I'd been trying to set. It felt like they were trying to fast-track things in a way that wasn't fair to me. And, of course, I told them I wasn't going to stand by and let them spread lies about me to family and friends. If they really wanted to fix things, they needed to respect my space and let me process everything in my own time, not rush me into some fake reunion. The response? Well, to no one's surprise, it was complete radio silence, not a single word. I honestly wasn't shocked though. My parents have always been the type to just avoid any kind of accountability when things go sideways. They've never been good at owning up to their mistakes or facing hard truths. I'm sure they'll just call me unforgiving or accuse me of holding a grudge. They love to throw those words around, but honestly I'm done worrying about it. I spent so many years bending over backwards to try and please them, always worrying about what they thought of me, but not anymore. Now it's all about me and protecting my peace, even if that means disappointing them. As for Claire, things are starting to slowly but surely improve. It's still a little shaky, but I can tell we're both trying. She's been checking in on me more often, which feels really nice. Honestly, it's not like everything's perfect or we're suddenly super close again, but it's progress, and that counts. She even sent Rainey a big box of books and art supplies, and that was such a thoughtful gesture. Rainey absolutely loved it. And I could tell Claire put a lot of thought into picking everything out. Claire also admitted that she's still dealing with guilt about how things went down between us. I think she's starting to understand more now how much her silence back then hurt me. But what matters is that she's committed to being a better sister and a better aunt from here on out, and that honestly means a lot to me. It's not like we're going to be best friends overnight or anything, but I still have some hope. I think we're both on the right track, even if it's a slow one. Rainey and I are doing great. She's so excited about starting kindergarten, and I'm focusing on creating the best life I can for her. We've got a solid support system with friends who genuinely care about us, and for now, that's enough. So, where do I go from here? I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and one thing I've realized is that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Just because I let go of the anger and pain doesn't mean I have to invite toxic people back into my life. It's about finding my own peace, and sometimes that means setting boundaries and walking away for good. Maybe down the road, I'll be open to revisiting things with my parents, but for now, today is not that day. I'm choosing peace over chaos, and honestly, it feels like the right decision. I know from the comments I've read that some of you have different views on this, and that's totally okay. Everyone's got their own perspective, and I'm not here to change anyone's mind. It wasn't easy for me to get through all of this, and honestly, I've second-guessed myself a lot. That's why I kept wondering if I made the right choice or not. But at the end of the day, I've had to do what feels right for me and my family. So thank you to all of you who've been supportive, who offered advice, and even to those who disagreed. Your comments and messages have really helped me think things through, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts. And I guess this is where the story ends. I'm moving forward, and I'm ready to focus on the people who truly matter in my life.